In an instant, my world had become a carefully orchestrated performance where every move I made was scrutinized and found wanting. Victoria's voice cut through the morning air, sharp and unforgiving, as she examined the prenatal vitamins I had chosen the day before. "These are completely inadequate for my grandchild," she declared, her manicured fingers turning the bottle over with the same disdain she might show a piece of rotting fruit. "I've done extensive research and found much better options that will ensure proper brain development." Her words carried the weight of absolute authority, as if my 7 months of pregnancy and consultations with my doctor meant nothing compared to her late-night internet searches. I stood there in her pristine kitchen, feeling like a child being scolded for choosing the wrong cereal, my growing belly a constant reminder that I was merely the vessel for what she considered her second chance at the perfect family legacy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "But Dr. Foster specifically recommended these," I tried to explain, my voice barely above a whisper as Victoria's disapproving gaze made me shrink into myself. "She said they have everything the baby needs." Victoria's laugh was cold and dismissive. "Dr. Foster doesn't understand the special requirements of a Mitchell child. This baby will be exceptional, and exceptional children need exceptional care from the very beginning." She swept the vitamins into the trash with theatrical finality, already reaching for the expensive supplements she had ordered online. "I've scheduled you an appointment with Dr. Harrison, a real specialist who understands genetics and optimal fetal development." The way she spoke about my unborn child as if it belonged entirely to her family sent a chill down my spine. But I found myself nodding weakly because confrontation had become impossible in this house, where my every concern was dismissed as hormonal irrationality. When Ryan appeared in the doorway, still half asleep and reaching for his coffee, I hoped for some semblance of support or at least acknowledgement that his mother's behavior was crossing boundaries. "Your mother threw away my prenatal vitamins," I said softly, hoping he would see the absurdity of the situation and stand up for his wife's right to make basic medical decisions about her own pregnancy. Ryan barely glanced up from his phone as he scrolled through work emails. "Mom knows what she's talking about. She raised me just fine, didn't she, Mom?" His automatic defense of Victoria, without even hearing the full story, had become so routine that I wondered if he was even capable of seeing me as a separate person with valid thoughts and feelings. Victoria beamed at her son's validation, her hand reaching out to touch his cheek with the kind of maternal affection she never showed me. "Of course, darling. I only want what's best for our baby." The possessive pronoun hung in the air like a claim of ownership, and I felt my identity as this child's mother slowly being erased in favor of Victoria's vision of herself as the primary maternal figure. Before that afternoon, while Ryan was at work and I thought I had a moment of privacy to call my own, Victoria appeared in the doorway of what used to be my home office but had been converted into a nursery planning space under her supervision. "I hope you're not planning to fill my grandchild's head with any of your family's limiting beliefs about modest expectations," she said, her voice carrying that familiar tone of concern that barely masked her contempt for anyone who didn't share her ambitious vision of success. I quickly ended the call with my mother, claiming fatigue, because explaining Victoria's interference would require energy I simply didn't have anymore. The isolation was becoming complete, as Victoria systematically cut me off from any support system that might validate my own instincts or remind me of who I used to be before I became merely the vessel for what she considered her second chance at the perfect family legacy. Later that evening, when I discovered Victoria had been in our bedroom, going through my personal belongings and photographing my belly without permission for what she called her grandchild album, something inside me finally sparked with the faintest ember of resistance. "Those are my private things," I said, my voice shaking, not with fear, but with the first stirrings of anger I had felt in months. Victoria looked genuinely surprised that I would object to her documentation of what she considered her grandchild's development. I'm creating a beautiful record of this precious time. Surely you want your child to know how carefully I monitored every stage of growth. The way she spoke made me question my own reaction, making me wonder if perhaps I was being selfish for wanting privacy during my own pregnancy. But a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that something was fundamentally wrong with a situation where I had no say in the most intimate aspects of carrying my own child. That tiny voice of resistance would be the seed that eventually grew into my salvation, though I couldn't know it yet as I stood there in my own bedroom, feeling like an intruder in my own life.
The morning I decided to buy my own maternity clothes became the day Victoria's mask began to slip completely, revealing the calculating control that lurked beneath her facade of loving concern. I had grown tired of wearing the shapeless, conservative outfits she had chosen for me, claiming they were appropriate for a Mitchell woman carrying a Mitchell child, and had secretly saved enough money from my small freelance design projects to purchase a few items that actually fit my changing body and reflected my personal style. When Victoria discovered the shopping bags hidden in my closet, her reaction was swift and merciless. "These are completely inappropriate," she declared, holding up a simple wrap dress in soft blue fabric as if it were something scandalous. "The neckline is too low, the fit is too form-fitting, and this color does nothing for your complexion. What will people think when they see you flaunting yourself in public while carrying our family's future?" The word flaunting stung because the dress was modest by any reasonable standard, but Victoria had a way of making me feel ashamed of my own body and its changes during pregnancy. She gathered all my purchases into the bags with swift efficiency, her movements sharp with barely contained anger. "I'm returning these immediately and getting proper replacements. Clearly, I cannot trust you to make appropriate choices." When I protested that the clothes were comfortable and made me feel like myself again, Victoria's eyes flashed with something that looked almost like hatred. "Feeling like yourself is exactly the problem. You are no longer just Sabrina. You are the mother of a Mitchell child, and that comes with responsibilities and standards you clearly don't understand." The systematic destruction of my identity continued when Victoria began intercepting phone calls from my family, answering with sugary concern. "Oh, Sabrina is resting right now. The doctor says too much excitement isn't good for the baby." I would discover these missed connections hours later, along with Victoria's detailed explanations of why my family's constant worry was harmful to my delicate condition. My mother's voice on my voicemail sounded increasingly concerned and confused. "Sweetheart, I've been trying to reach you for days. Victoria keeps saying you're too tired to talk, but that doesn't sound like you. Please call me when you can." But when I tried to return the call, Victoria would materialize as if summoned by some maternal radar, suggesting that perhaps I should rest instead of working myself up with unnecessary conversations. The isolation became more complete when Ryan started receiving carefully curated reports of my emotional instability from his mother. "She's been very weepy lately," Victoria would tell him during their evening conversations that I was not invited to join. "The hormones are making her unreasonable and demanding. She actually got upset with me for trying to help her choose appropriate clothes." Ryan's response was predictably dismissive when he confronted me later that evening. "Mom's just trying to help, and you're making everything about yourself. This pregnancy isn't just about you anymore. It's about our family's future." His words carried the weight of absolute conviction, as if questioning his mother's motives was not only wrong, but potentially harmful to her unborn child. The gaslighting became so systematic that I began to doubt my own perceptions and started keeping a small journal hidden in an old art portfolio where I recorded incidents that felt wrong, but which everyone around me insisted were normal expressions of love and concern. Writing down Victoria's exact words and actions became my lifeline to sanity, as the world around me insisted that black was white and control was care. Victoria threw away my maternity clothes and called them inappropriate, I wrote in careful handwriting. She intercepted 3 calls from my mother today and told her I was too tired to talk. Ryan says I'm being hormonal when I try to explain how isolated I feel. Seeing the pattern written down in my own handwriting made it impossible to dismiss my instincts entirely. Even as everyone around me insisted, I was imagining problems where none existed. The breaking point came when I decided to take a short walk around the neighborhood, something my doctor had encouraged for both physical and mental health. Victoria's reaction was immediate and explosive. Walking alone in your condition is irresponsible and selfish. What if something happens to my grandchild because you needed to prove some ridiculous point about independence? Her voice carried across the front yard where I stood frozen on the porch steps, keys in hand and determination in my heart. The neighbors who were tending their gardens looked up at the commotion, and I felt my face burn with shame as Victoria continued her public lecture about my unfitness as a mother-to-be. Get back inside this instant before you do something we'll all regret. The humiliation of being scolded like a wayward child in front of people I barely knew was devastating. But what hurt more was Ryan's immediate support of his mother when he emerged from the house. "She's right, Sabrina. Why take unnecessary risks when mom can drive you anywhere you need to go?" His inability to see that I needed independence and dignity as much as safety revealed how completely Victoria's narrative had consumed his understanding of our relationship. As I retreated into the house with my tail between my legs, I caught a glimpse of the woman next door watching the scene with obvious concern. Her expression wasn't one of judgment, but of recognition, as if she had seen this particular dynamic before and understood its implications. That moment of being truly seen by a stranger would prove to be more important than I could possibly know, though at the time it felt like just another witness to my humiliation and helplessness. Carmen Santos had been watching the slow-motion destruction of my autonomy from her kitchen window for weeks, and the morning Victoria publicly berated me about taking a walk became the moment she decided to intervene. I didn't know then that Carmen worked as a paralegal and had spent years helping women escape situations exactly like mine, or that her own history of domestic violence had taught her to recognize the subtle signs of psychological abuse that others might dismiss as family concern. The next morning, when Victoria was at her weekly hair appointment and Ryan had left for work, I heard a gentle knock on the front door. Opening it to find my neighbor Carmen holding a plate of fresh muffins and wearing a warm smile was like discovering an oasis after months in the desert. "Hi, I'm Carmen Santos from next door. I thought you might like some company and maybe a cup of coffee." Her invitation was casual and friendly, but something in her eyes suggested she understood more about my situation than a typical neighborly gesture would warrant. I glanced nervously over my shoulder, as if Victoria might materialize to stop this interaction, then stepped outside and closed the door behind me with the furtive movements of someone engaging in forbidden behavior. "I'd love that," I said, my voice sounding rusty from disuse in normal social conversation. "But I should probably stay where Victoria can find me when she gets back. She worries if she doesn't know exactly where I am." Carmen's expression didn't change, but I caught a flicker of something that might have been recognition in her dark eyes. "Of course, we can sit on my porch if that makes you more comfortable. The fresh air will be good for you and the baby." Her easy acceptance of my restrictions felt like a small kindness, and I followed her across the narrow strip of grass that separated our houses, like crossing into another world. Sitting on Carmen's porch swing with a warm mug in my hands and the morning sun on my face, I felt something inside me that had been frozen for months begin to thaw. Carmen talked about ordinary things, the weather, her job at a law firm downtown, her teenage daughter Maria, who was applying to colleges, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I remembered what normal conversation felt like. "You know," Carmen said casually as she sipped her coffee, "I noticed you don't get out much. Is everything okay? Sometimes pregnancy can make us feel isolated, especially if we're not used to having so much support around us all the time." The way she said support with just the slightest pause made me look at her more carefully. There was something in her tone that suggested she understood the difference between genuine care and controlling behavior, and for the first time in months, I felt safe enough to hint at the truth of my situation. "Victoria, my mother-in-law, she's very involved in the pregnancy," I said carefully, testing the waters of honest conversation. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not the one having this baby, like it's her experience and I'm just there."
Carmen nodded slowly, her expression remaining neutral but attentive. That must be really hard. Pregnancy is such a personal experience, and feeling like you don't have control over your own body and choices, that would be overwhelming for anyone. The validation was like oxygen to someone who had been suffocating, and I found myself talking more freely than I had in months. I told her about the vitamin incident, the clothing restrictions, the intercepted phone calls, and the way every decision about my pregnancy and my life had been systematically taken away from me. With each example, Carmen's expression grew more concerned, though she was careful not to alarm me with strong reactions that might make me retreat back into silence. "Has your doctor noticed any of this?" Carmen asked gently. Sometimes medical professionals can be helpful advocates when family dynamics become complicated. I shook my head, explaining how Victoria accompanied me to every appointment and dominated conversations with Dr. Foster, making it impossible to speak privately about anything. Carmen listened without judgment, occasionally asking gentle questions that helped me see patterns I had been too close to recognize. When Victoria's car pulled into the driveway an hour later, I jumped up from the porch swing with the guilty reflex of someone caught in forbidden behavior. Carmen stood too, her movements calm and unhurried. "It was so nice to meet you, Sabrina. Please feel free to come over anytime you need a friend or just want to talk." Victoria's approach across the yard was swift and territorial, her smile bright but her eyes cold as she assessed this new threat to her control. "Sabrina, darling, I was worried when I couldn't find you inside. You know how important it is to avoid unnecessary stress and excitement." Carmen's response was perfectly polite but subtly assertive. "I hope you don't mind that I invited Sabrina for coffee. It's so important for expectant mothers to have social support and friendship during pregnancy." The way she emphasized social support made it clear that she was not easily intimidated by Victoria's obvious displeasure.
Of course, Victoria replied through gritted teeth, her hand reaching out to grasp my elbow with what appeared to be gentle guidance but felt like ownership. Though Sabrina's doctor has recommended limiting social activities that might overstimulate her delicate system. The lie was so smooth and delivered with such maternal concern that I almost believed it myself, but Carmen's slight raised eyebrows suggested she recognized it for what it was. "Well, I'm here if you ever need anything," she said to me directly, her eyes holding mine for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. That evening, Victoria's prohibition was swift and absolute. "I don't want you spending time with that woman," she declared as she prepared dinner with sharp, angry movements. "She's clearly the type who thrives on drama and gossip, and exposure to that kind of negative energy could harm the baby." When I protested that Carmen had been nothing but kind and supportive, Victoria's mask slipped completely for just a moment. "You have everything you need right here in this house. Seeking attention and validation from strangers shows a disturbing lack of gratitude for everything Ryan and I have provided for you." But something had shifted during that morning conversation with Carmen. Some part of me that remembered what it felt like to be heard and believed. The next week, when Victoria was at her book club meeting, I found myself walking to the local library where I had noticed Carmen's car parked. The 15-minute conversation we had among the stacks of books felt like rebellion and revolution combined. "I'm worried about you," Carmen said quietly as we pretended to browse the parenting section. "What you've described sounds like emotional abuse, and I'm concerned it might escalate as your pregnancy progresses." The word abuse hit me like a physical blow because I had been so carefully trained to see Victoria's behavior as love and concern. Carmen reached into her purse and handed me a small piece of paper. "This is my friend James Rivera's contact information. He's a family lawyer who specializes in helping women in difficult situations. You don't have to call him now, but please keep this somewhere safe, just in case." Taking that slip of paper felt like accepting a lifeline I wasn't sure I was ready to use. But the very fact that someone believed my situation was serious enough to warrant legal consultation planted a seed of understanding that would eventually grow into the strength I needed to save myself and my unborn child. The tension in Dr. Foster's office was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. As Victoria positioned herself strategically between my chair and the doctor's desk, her perfectly manicured hands folded in her lap while her eyes tracked every word that passed between the medical professional and me. I had grown accustomed to Victoria's presence at my appointments, her insistence that she needed to be there to ask the important questions I might forget in my pregnancy brain fog. But something about Dr. Foster's demeanor suggested she was not impressed by my mother-in-law's overwhelming involvement. "How have you been feeling since our last appointment, Sabrina?" asked Dr. Foster, her piercing blue eyes focused entirely on me despite Victoria's obvious desire to field the question herself. Before I could answer, Victoria's voice cut through the space with practiced concern. "She's been having emotional volatility, doctor. The hormones seem to be making her quite unreasonable and weepy. Yesterday, she became upset over something as simple as me helping her choose appropriate prenatal vitamins." Dr. Foster's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she was filing away this information in a way that Victoria might not appreciate. "I see. Sabrina, how would you describe your emotional state? Are you feeling supported in your daily life?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication, and I felt Victoria's sharp gaze boring into the side of my head as I struggled to find words that wouldn't trigger another lecture about my ungrateful attitude. "I'm managing," I said carefully, my voice barely above a whisper as I tried to navigate the treacherous waters between honesty and self-preservation. "She's managing beautifully," Victoria interjected with forced brightness. "We've created such a nurturing environment for her and the baby. I've taken over all the stressful decisions about nutrition, exercise, and preparation, so she can just focus on growing our beautiful grandchild." The possessive pronoun hung in the air like a red flag, and I watched Dr. Foster's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly as she processed Victoria's choice of words. "That's very involved of you, Mrs. Mitchell. Sabrina, are you comfortable with this level of assistance, or would you prefer to make some of these decisions yourself?" "She needs guidance," Victoria answered before I could even open my mouth. First-time mothers often don't realize the importance of proper care, and with the Mitchell family history of exceptional children, we can't afford to take any chances. Dr. Foster set down her pen with deliberate precision and fixed Victoria with a stare that could have frozen water. "Mrs. Mitchell, I appreciate your concern for your daughter-in-law's welfare, but I need to hear from Sabrina directly about her experiences and preferences. Perhaps you could wait in the lobby while I complete my examination." The suggestion hit Victoria like a physical blow, her carefully maintained composure cracking just enough to reveal the controlling fury beneath. "That's highly irregular. I've been present for every appointment to ensure proper communication between patient and doctor. Surely you understand the importance of family support during such a delicate time."
Family support is indeed important, Dr. Foster replied evenly. But medical confidentiality and patient autonomy are legal requirements that I take very seriously. Sabrina is my patient, not you. And she has the right to private consultation with her healthcare provider. The battle of wills that followed was swift but decisive, with Victoria eventually retreating to the waiting room with the tight-lipped fury of someone unaccustomed to having her authority challenged. As soon as the door closed behind her, I felt something inside my chest that had been constricted for months finally expand enough to let me breathe properly. "Now then," Dr. Foster said gently, her entire demeanor shifting from professional firmness to warm concern. "How are you really feeling, Sabrina? And please, don't worry about what anyone outside this room might think about your answers." The permission to speak honestly was so foreign and precious that I found myself trembling as months of suppressed truth came tumbling out in a rush of desperate words. I told her about the vitamin replacements, the clothing restrictions, the intercepted phone calls, and the constant feeling that I was failing some impossible test of worthiness to carry a Mitchell child. Dr. Foster listened without interruption, her expression growing more concerned with each revelation. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment before speaking. Sabrina, what you're describing sounds like a pattern of emotional abuse and controlling behavior. This isn't normal family involvement in pregnancy care. The words emotional abuse hit me like a diagnosis I hadn't been prepared to hear, even though Carmen had used similar language during our library conversation. Hearing it from a medical professional gave it a weight and legitimacy that I couldn't dismiss as dramatic overreaction. During your examination today, I'm going to check for any physical signs of stress or harm, Dr. Foster continued. I want you to know that anything I find will be documented medically, and if you ever need those records for legal purposes, they'll be available to you. When she discovered the finger-shaped bruises on my upper arms from Victoria's rough handling during our confrontation about the maternity clothes, her expression hardened into something that reminded me she had probably seen too many women in situations like mine. "These bruises are consistent with forceful gripping," she said as she photographed them with clinical precision. "Do you remember how you got them?" I explained about Victoria's anger over my clothing choices and the way she had grabbed me to emphasize her points about appropriate behavior for a Mitchell woman. Dr. Foster documented everything in language that transformed my confused shame into concrete evidence of mistreatment. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I'm going to give you some educational materials about prenatal care," she said as she prepared a packet of papers. "Hidden inside will be information about domestic violence resources and safety planning. I want you to know that what's happening to you isn't your fault, and there are people who can help if you decide you want to make changes." When Victoria returned to the examination room, her smile was brittle but determined. "I hope everything is progressing normally with our baby," she said, the possessive pronoun again grating against my newly awakened sense of ownership over my own pregnancy. "Everything looks fine," Dr. Foster replied neutrally. "I've given Sabrina some additional prenatal education materials to review at home. It's important that she understands all aspects of her care as we move into the final weeks." Victoria's eyes narrowed as she examined the innocent-looking packet of papers, clearly suspicious but unable to identify any obvious threat to her control. "Of course. I'll make sure she reviews everything thoroughly. We want to be completely prepared." The drive home was silent except for Victoria's occasional comments about Dr. Foster's unprofessional boundary issues and her plans to find a more family-friendly healthcare provider for future appointments. I clutched the packet of papers in my lap like a lifeline, knowing that hidden within the routine prenatal information was my first real roadmap towards freedom. That evening, while Victoria prepared dinner and Ryan worked in his study, I locked myself in the bathroom and carefully extracted the domestic violence resources from between pages about fetal development and nutrition guidelines. Reading about safety planning, legal protections, and the cycle of abuse was like having someone hold up a mirror to my life and show me patterns I had been too close to see clearly. For the first time in months, I felt like I had allies in my corner, people who understood that my situation was neither normal nor healthy, and who were willing to help me find a way out if I could summon the courage to take the first step towards reclaiming my life and protecting my unborn child from the toxic environment that had become our reality. The morning Victoria discovered my hidden journal felt like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion.
each carefully constructed lie and manipulation tumbling down to reveal the ugly foundation of control and obsession that had been driving our entire relationship. I had grown careless in my desperation for some outlet, some way to maintain my sanity by recording the daily erosions of my autonomy, and the notebook tucked inside my old art portfolio had become my lifeline to reality, in a world where everyone insisted that black was white and abuse was love.
Victoria's rage when she found my documentation was immediate and volcanic, her carefully maintained facade of concerned grandmother evaporating like morning mist to reveal something predatory and desperate underneath. "What is this garbage?" she shrieked, waving the journal through the air like evidence of some unforgivable betrayal. "These lies about our family, these vicious distortions of love and care." I stood frozen in the doorway of what had once been my bedroom, but had become just another space Victoria controlled and monitored, watching her flip through pages that contained months of careful documentation about vitamin replacements, clothing restrictions, intercepted phone calls, and the gradual, systematic destruction of my independence and identity. "You ungrateful little snake," Victoria continued, her voice rising to a pitch that made me worry about the neighbors hearing. "After everything we've done for you, all the sacrifices we've made to ensure you have the best possible environment to carry our precious child, and this is how you repay us? With lies and manipulation and attempts to turn people against your own family?" The irony of her accusations was staggering, but pointing that out would only escalate her fury further, so I remained silent and tried to project the submissive acceptance that usually calmed her rages. But something was different this time. Some line had been crossed that stripped away even the pretense of caring about my well-being or the baby's safety. "I found this, too," she snarled, pulling Dr. Foster's domestic violence resources from where I had hidden them inside a pregnancy book. "Poison designed to fill your head with paranoid fantasies about abuse and control. As if providing love and guidance to an obviously unstable young woman constitutes some kind of criminal behavior." Watching her tear apart the safety planning information felt like watching someone destroy a bridge I hadn't even known I was building, each shredded page representing another barrier between me and any hope of escape from this suffocating prison of false concern and genuine malice. "I won't have this toxic influence in our home," Victoria declared, gathering the destroyed papers into a pile that she would later burn in the backyard fire pit. "And I certainly won't allow you to poison our grandchild's environment with these sick fantasies about the people who love you most." Her words carried the conviction of someone who had completely convinced herself that her behavior was not only justified but necessary, that my resistance to her control was evidence of mental instability rather than healthy self-preservation. The gaslighting had become so complete that she genuinely seemed to believe her own narrative about salvation and protection. When I tried to explain that the journal was just my way of processing feelings and that Dr. Foster's information was standard educational material, Victoria's face contorted with such rage that I took an involuntary step backward. "Don't you dare lie to me again," she hissed. "I know manipulation when I see it, and I won't let you destroy everything we've built here." The confrontation escalated when I made the mistake of mentioning Carmen's name, explaining that talking to my neighbor had helped me feel less isolated during a difficult time. Victoria's reaction was immediate and explosive, her hands clenching into fists as she processed this information about unauthorized social contact. "That woman has been filling your head with poison from the beginning. I should have put a stop to it immediately instead of hoping you would show better judgment. But clearly, you're too weak and stupid to recognize people who want to destroy our family's happiness." Her words cut deep because they targeted my greatest insecurity about my own judgment and worth, but they also revealed the extent to which she had been monitoring and controlling my every interaction with the outside world.
The isolation hadn't been accidental. It had been carefully orchestrated to make me dependent on her version of reality. When I tried to move toward the door, thinking I could escape to another room and let her rage burn itself out, Victoria stepped directly into my path with the predatory focus of someone who had decided that complete destruction was the only acceptable outcome. "You're not going anywhere until we settle this once and for all," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that was somehow more frightening than her screaming. "I'm going to protect my grandchild from your toxic influence, even if that means protecting the baby from its own mother." The threat was so direct and unmistakable that my survival instincts finally overrode months of conditioned submission, and I tried to pull away from her grip with more force than I had ever used before. But Victoria was prepared for resistance, and her response was swift and brutal. In her fury about my betrayal and her determination to reassert complete control, Victoria shoved me toward the staircase with such force that I stumbled backward, my pregnant body off balance and unable to catch itself as I fell down the hardwood steps in a tumbling crash that seemed to last forever. The pain in my abdomen was immediate and terrifying, but even through my physical agony, I could hear Victoria's voice above me already spinning a narrative about accidents and clumsiness that would explain away her moment of pure, violent rage. The irony that the woman who claimed to be protecting my unborn child had just inflicted potentially fatal harm on both of us was lost on Victoria as she stood at the top of the stairs, her face pale with shock at her own actions, but her voice already preparing the lies that would transform assault into accident and rage into unfortunate circumstance.
The ambulance ride to the hospital passed in a blur of sirens and medical equipment while paramedics worked to stabilize both me and my unborn child, their professional calm masking the urgency of a situation where every minute could mean the difference between life and death. Through the haze of pain and fear, I managed to give them Carmen's contact information, knowing that she would be the only person who would understand the true circumstances behind my accidental fall down the stairs. Dr. Foster was waiting when we arrived at the emergency room, her expression grim but determined as she took charge of my care with the authority of someone who had probably seen too many women in similar circumstances. "Get her into trauma room 2 immediately," she ordered the nurses, then turned to the paramedics for their report while Victoria hovered nearby with her carefully prepared story about pregnancy clumsiness and unfortunate accidents. The medical examination was thorough and professional, with Dr. Foster documenting every injury with clinical precision while speaking to me in calm, reassuring tones. "The baby's heartbeat is strong," she said as the monitor showed steady rhythms that made me cry with relief. "You have some bruising and minor lacerations, but nothing that appears life-threatening. However, I want to keep you for observation to make sure there are no complications we haven't detected yet." Victoria's attempt to insert herself into the medical decision-making was swift and automatic, her voice carrying that familiar tone of maternal authority. "Of course, we want the best possible care for our precious grandchild. What do you need from us to ensure proper treatment?" Dr. Foster's response was polite but firm, her professional demeanor creating a barrier that Victoria couldn't penetrate with manipulation or false concern. "Actually, Mrs. Mitchell, hospital policy requires that we limit visitors during the initial assessment period. You're welcome to wait in the family lounge, and we'll update you when appropriate." The dismissal was diplomatic but unmistakable, and I watched Victoria's face cycle through confusion, anger, and calculation as she processed this unexpected resistance to her authority. "Surely immediate family should be present for important medical decisions," she argued, but Dr. Foster remained unmoved by arguments that had worked so effectively in private settings. When Carmen arrived 20 minutes later, her appearance in my hospital room felt like the arrival of cavalry in a war zone, her familiar face radiating the kind of genuine concern that Victoria's performance could never match. "Oh, honey," she said simply, taking my hand with gentle firmness, "I came as soon as I got your message."
Victoria's reaction to Carmen's presence was immediate and territorial, her voice rising with indignation about unauthorized visitors and inappropriate interference in family matters. But the hospital environment created different rules than the suburban prison where Victoria had been able to control every interaction, and the nursing staff seemed more inclined to support my choices about who I wanted nearby during my recovery. "I've called James Rivera," Carmen whispered when Victoria stepped out to make phone calls about the incident. "He's coming to discuss your options for legal protection. You don't have to decide anything right now, but it's important that you understand what resources are available." The arrival of James Rivera, an hour later, marked a turning point in my understanding of my situation and my options for escape. He was a compact man with gentle eyes and a quiet authority that suggested extensive experience helping women in circumstances like mine navigate the complex intersection of family violence and legal protection. "I understand you've had an accident," he said carefully, his choice of words neutral, but his eyes conveying that he understood the likely reality behind euphemistic language. "Carmen has filled me in on some of the background circumstances, and I want you to know that there are immediate protections we can put in place if you're interested." When Ryan finally arrived at the hospital, his appearance created a moment of truth that I had been dreading, knowing that he would have to choose between believing his mother's version of events and confronting the possibility that the woman who raised him was capable of violence against his pregnant wife. His confusion and conflict were visible as he moved between Victoria's dramatic performance of concerned grandmother and my quiet testimony about what actually happened on those stairs. "Mom says you fell because you were upset about some misunderstanding. She's really worried about you and the baby." The moment stretched between us, heavy with years of his inability to see his mother clearly, but something about the clinical setting and the presence of witnesses who had no investment in protecting Victoria's reputation seemed to create space for doubt about her narrative of innocent accidents and pregnancy clumsiness. James Rivera's gentle but pointed questions about the circumstances leading up to my fall created a record that transformed Victoria's story into something that would have to stand up to legal scrutiny, and I watched her carefully prepared explanations begin to crumble under the weight of specific details and timeline inconsistencies. "The important thing right now is ensuring Sabrina's safety and recovery," Dr. Foster interjected when Victoria tried to pressure Ryan into taking me home against medical advice. "We'll need to monitor both mother and baby for at least 24 hours to rule out any delayed complications from the trauma."
The hospital became a temporary sanctuary where Victoria's authority couldn't penetrate, where medical professionals and legal advocates created barriers that her manipulation couldn't breach. For the first time in months, I was surrounded by people whose primary concern was my well-being, rather than their own needs for control and validation. That evening, as Carmen sat beside my bed and James Rivera explained the process for obtaining emergency protective orders, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the early days of my pregnancy. Hope that my child and I might actually have a future free from the toxic control that had nearly cost us both our lives that afternoon on Victoria's staircase. Carmen's modest two-bedroom house became my sanctuary in ways I hadn't imagined possible when she offered me shelter, with the simple words, "You're coming home with me, and that's final," as the hospital prepared my discharge papers. The contrast between her warm, lived-in space filled with family photos and comfortable, mismatched furniture and Victoria's sterile showplace was like stepping from a museum into an actual home where people were allowed to exist without performance or judgment. Walking through Carmen's front door with my small bag of belongings felt like crossing into another world where my choices mattered and my voice carried weight in decisions about my own life. The guest bedroom she had prepared contained a comfortable bed with soft quilts, a small desk where I could work on freelance design projects, and, most importantly, a door that I could close and lock whenever I needed privacy and solitude. James Rivera wasted no time in filing the necessary paperwork for a restraining order against Victoria, his efficient movements through the legal system creating barriers that felt both foreign and liberating to someone who had grown accustomed to having no protection from daily psychological assault.
The emergency order will be in place within 24 hours, he explained as he spread documents across Carmen's kitchen table. This legally prohibits Victoria from contacting you directly or coming within 500 feet of your location. The legal language felt like armor after months of vulnerability, each clause and provision creating boundaries that Victoria would be legally prohibited from crossing. James explained the divorce proceedings with patient thoroughness, outlining my rights to financial support, property division, and most importantly, sole custody of my unborn child, given the documented evidence of abuse and Ryan's failure to protect me from his mother's violence. The counseling sessions he arranged with Dr. Sarah Chen became my education in understanding the systematic destruction of my autonomy that had occurred so gradually, I hadn't recognized it as abuse until Carmen and Dr. Foster helped me name it. Emotional abuse often escalates during pregnancy, Dr. Chen explained during our first session in her comfortable office filled with plants and soft lighting. The abuser sees the pregnancy as increased vulnerability and an opportunity for greater control over their victim. Hearing my experiences described in clinical terms helped me understand that Victoria's behavior hadn't been love gone wrong or cultural differences about family involvement, but calculated manipulation designed to isolate me from support systems and make me dependent on her version of reality. The patterns Dr. Chen outlined matched my experiences so perfectly that I felt both validated and horrified at how textbook my situation had become. Gaslighting, isolation, financial control, monitoring communications, controlling appearance and medical care, Dr. Chen listed methodically as she reviewed my case notes. Your mother-in-law employed virtually every technique in the emotional abuse playbook, which suggests her behavior was deliberate rather than misguided concern. Victoria's violations of the restraining order began immediately, starting with phone calls to Carmen's house where she would hang up when anyone other than me answered, then escalating to packages left on the doorstep containing baby items and notes about how much she missed her grandchild. Each incident was documented by James Rivera, creating a paper trail that would strengthen our case for permanent protection. She's testing boundaries, Dr. Chen explained when I expressed confusion about Victoria's persistence despite legal consequences. Abusers often escalate their behavior when they lose control because the alternative is accepting that their victim has escaped their influence. The gifts Victoria left were particularly manipulative. Expensive baby clothes and toys, accompanied by handwritten cards expressing her undying love for her precious grandchild and her heartbreak over being separated from the family she had worked so hard to protect. Reading her words, I could almost believe her version of events if I didn't have months of documentation proving the reality behind her performance of devoted grandmother. Carmen's support during this period was unwavering, from practical help with legal appointments and counseling sessions to emotional encouragement when Victoria's harassment made me doubt my decision to leave. You saved yourself and your baby, she reminded me whenever I wavered. That takes incredible strength. The stress of Victoria's continued harassment and the approaching birth triggered early labor at 36 weeks, sending Carmen and me rushing to the hospital where Dr. Foster met us with the calm professionalism that had become my anchor in medical crises. Everything looks good, she assured me as monitors showed strong fetal heartbeat and normal progression. Your body is ready and the baby is fully developed.
Baby Lucas entered the world at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning with Carmen holding one hand and Dr. Foster coaching me through the final pushes. Their presence creating a circle of chosen family that felt more real and supportive than any blood relationship I had experienced. The moment they placed my son on my chest, his tiny face scrunched and red from his journey into the world, I felt something fierce and protective ignite inside me that transformed every remaining doubt about my decisions into absolute certainty about protecting this tiny person from the toxicity that had nearly destroyed us both. "He's perfect," Carmen whispered, tears streaming down her face as she watched me count Lucas's fingers and toes with the wonder of every new mother discovering her child's completeness. "Look at those strong lungs." Lucas's first cries filled the delivery room with sound that represented
everything pure and hopeful about new beginnings. And I found myself laughing through my own tears as I realized that this moment belonged entirely to us, free from Victoria's controlling presence and manipulative claims of ownership. This was my child, my choice, my family. The nursing staff respected our carefully prepared birth plan, which included strict instructions about visitor restrictions and contact information for security if anyone attempted to gain unauthorized access to our room. James Rivera had coordinated with hospital administration to ensure that Victoria's restraining order was on file and that all staff understood the legal barriers protecting me and my newborn son. Victoria's arrival at the hospital 2 hours later was dramatic and desperate. Her demands for immediate access to her grandchild were met with security guards who politely but firmly escorted her to the parking lot while explaining that her presence violated multiple legal orders. Watching through my room window as she argued with hospital personnel, her perfectly styled hair disheveled and her composed facade cracking under the pressure of being denied access to what she considered her property, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief that my son would never experience the suffocating control that had nearly broken me. "She can't touch him," Carmen said simply, settling into the chair beside my bed as Lucas slept peacefully in my arms, his tiny fist curled around my finger with the absolute trust that newborns give their mothers. "You've made sure of that." The legal protections James Rivera had established meant that every decision about Lucas's care and future belonged entirely to me, from medical choices to visitation rates to the simple freedom of choosing his clothes without interference or judgment. The power to protect my child felt revolutionary after months of being treated as merely a vessel for someone else's vision of family legacy. Dr. Foster's discharge instructions included resources for new mothers and gentle reminders about the support systems available if I ever felt overwhelmed by single parenthood. "You've shown incredible strength throughout this process," she said, as she completed Lucas's initial health assessment, documenting his healthy weight and strong reflexes. "That strength will serve you well as his mother." Carmen's house transformed into a temporary nursery where Lucas thrived in an environment of genuine love and support, rather than obsessive control. His peaceful temperament perhaps reflecting the absence of the tension and conflict that had marked the final months of my pregnancy. Watching him sleep in the portable crib Carmen had borrowed from her sister, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the early weeks of my pregnancy. Pure joy in my child's existence without fear about who might try to claim ownership of his life. The first weeks of motherhood brought the expected challenges of sleepless nights and constant feedings, but they also brought the unexpected joy of making every decision about Lucas's care based on his needs and my instincts rather than someone else's demands or expectations. When he cried, I could comfort him without criticism. When he needed feeding, I could nurture him without supervision. When he slept, I could rest beside him without fear of judgment about my maternal competence. 3 weeks after Lucas's birth, Victoria's desperation reached a breaking point that would finally demonstrate the destructive consequences of her own toxic behavior in the most literal way possible. The restraining order had held for nearly a month, but her escalating attempts to contact me through third parties and her increasingly erratic behavior suggested that legal barriers alone might not be enough to contain her obsession with gaining access to what she still considered her grandchild. Carmen's late-night call to 911 reporting sounds of breaking glass and someone attempting to enter through her upstairs window sent police rushing to our sanctuary just as Victoria's obsession with accessing her grandchild drove her to criminal behavior that no amount of family loyalty could excuse or explain away. The sound of sirens approaching our quiet suburban street felt both terrifying and vindicating, proof that Victoria's behavior had finally crossed lines that even the legal system recognized as dangerous. I was nursing Lucas in the living room when Carmen burst through the front door, her face pale with shock and her hand shaking as she dialed emergency services. "Someone's trying to break in upstairs," she whispered, her voice tight with controlled panic. "I saw a ladder against the side of the house and heard breaking glass." The irony of Victoria's fall down the same staircase where she had pushed me was lost on no one, especially when the paramedics discovered evidence of her own pregnancy that she had been hiding while obsessing over mine. The crash had been audible throughout the neighborhood.
House. A series of thuds and breaking wood that suggested significant impact as Victoria tumbled down the hardwood steps in an almost perfect parallel to the violence she had inflicted on me weeks earlier. "She's approximately 12 weeks along," the EMT reported to police as they prepared her for transport to the same hospital where Lucas had been born just weeks earlier. "Significant abdominal trauma, possible miscarriage, we need to move quickly." The revelation of Victoria's pregnancy hit me like a physical blow. The realization that she had been carrying her own child while systematically abusing me during mine, adding another layer of psychological complexity to her pathology that made her behavior even more disturbing. Had she been planning to replace my child with her own? Had her obsession with my pregnancy been projection of her own secret condition? The miscarriage that resulted from Victoria's fall seemed like cosmic justice to some observers, though I felt only a complex mixture of vindication and sadness that her toxic behavior had ultimately destroyed what she claimed to value most. Carmen held Lucas while I gave my statement to police, her protective instincts creating a barrier between my son and the chaos that Victoria's actions had brought to our peaceful sanctuary. Ryan's arrival at the police station where I was recounting the break-in attempt marked the final collapse of any possibility for reconciliation between us. His face paled with shock as he processed the reality of his mother's criminal behavior and the pregnancy she had hidden from everyone, including her own son. "I didn't know," he repeated over and over, as if saying it enough times might absolve him of years of enabling and denial. "She never told me she was pregnant," he said to the detective taking statements. "I thought she was just devastated about losing access to the grandchild. I never imagined she would break into someone's house." The criminal charges against Victoria for stalking, breaking and entering, and violating a restraining order meant that her consequences would extend far beyond family disapproval into legal accountability that couldn't be manipulated or explained away. James Rivera's documentation of months of harassment and escalating behavior provided prosecutors with a clear pattern of obsessive conduct that made Victoria's actions impossible to dismiss as grief or misunderstanding. Watching the police car drive away with Victoria in custody felt like the closing of a chapter that had threatened to destroy both my life and my son's future. Her own fall serving as a final demonstration that toxic behavior ultimately destroys the perpetrator more completely than their victims, if those victims find the strength and support to escape the cycle of abuse before it reaches its logical conclusion of complete destruction. 6 months had passed since Victoria's fall down those same stairs, where she had pushed me in her rage, and the world had transformed into something I barely recognized as the same place where I had once lived in fear and submission. Lucas was sitting up now, his bright eyes tracking everything around him with the curious intensity of a child discovering that the world was full of wonders to explore. And I found myself marveling daily at how different his infancy was from what I had imagined during those dark months when Victoria controlled every aspect of my pregnancy. Carmen's house had evolved into our permanent home after she suggested I stop looking for my own apartment and simply stay where Lucas and I had already built our routines and relationships. "This place is too big for just me anyway," she said one evening as we watched Lucas attempt to crawl across her living room carpet. "And Maria loves having a baby brother to spoil when she comes home from college." The legal proceedings had concluded with Victoria accepting a plea agreement that included court-mandated therapy, community service, and a permanent restraining order that would protect Lucas and me for years to come. James Rivera had negotiated a settlement that provided financial security without requiring ongoing contact with Ryan or his family, creating clean boundaries that allowed us to build our new life without the shadow of past trauma hanging over every decision. She's been attending her therapy sessions regularly, James informed me during one of our monthly check-ins at his office downtown. The court reports indicate she's beginning to acknowledge some responsibility for her actions, though the psychologist notes that she still struggles with accepting the full extent of the harm she caused. The idea that Victoria might eventually understand the devastation she had inflicted seemed both impossible and irrelevant to my daily reality, where Lucas's needs and development took precedence over analyzing the psychology of someone who had nearly destroyed us both. Dr. Chen had helped me understand that forgiveness was a process I could pursue or ignore entirely based on my own healing needs rather than any obligation to absolve Victoria of her crimes against my family. Some survivors find peace through forgiveness. Others find strength through maintaining boundaries and focusing on their own growth. Neither path is superior to the other, and you're not required to pursue reconciliation just because Victoria might be making progress in therapy.
My return to graphic design work had begun slowly with small freelance projects I could complete during Lucas's nap times, but Carmen's encouragement and practical support had allowed me to gradually build a client base that provided both creative fulfillment and financial independence. Working from her kitchen table while Lucas played in his portable pen nearby felt like reclaiming parts of myself that had been buried under months of being treated as nothing more than an incubator for Victoria's vision of family legacy. The morning I received an email from a prestigious design firm offering me a part-time position with full benefits and the possibility of remote work felt like validation that my skills and creativity had survived the systematic destruction of my confidence during those months under Victoria's control. "They want to meet with you next week," I told Carmen excitedly as Lucas banged wooden blocks together on the floor between us. "Of course they do," Carmen replied, with the matter-of-fact confidence that had become one of my anchors during the rebuilding process. "You're talented and experienced, and any company would be lucky to have you." The interview process had been nerve-wracking after months away from professional environments, but discussing design concepts and creative solutions reminded me of who I had been before Victoria's manipulation convinced me that I was incompetent and unworthy of making important decisions. The offer they extended included flexible scheduling that would allow me to maintain my primary focus on Lucas while rebuilding my career at a sustainable pace. Ryan's attempts at communication had been sporadic and carefully filtered through James Rivera, his messages expressing regret about his failure to protect me from his mother's behavior and requests for information about Lucas's development. The letters were filled with apologies and promises about personal growth, but Dr. Chen had helped me understand that accepting accountability for enabling abuse was different from actually changing the patterns that had made that enabling possible. "He says he's been attending therapy to understand how he failed you and Lucas," James reported during one of our meetings. "He's also completed an anger management program and wants you to know that he doesn't expect forgiveness, but hopes you'll consider allowing supervised visitation with Lucas when he's older." The decision about whether Lucas would ever have a relationship with his father felt overwhelming and premature, so I had asked James to table any discussion of visitation rights until Lucas was old enough for me to consider his own potential interest in knowing Ryan. The protective instincts that had emerged during those first moments holding my newborn son remained fierce and unwavering when it came to shielding him from people who had proven themselves incapable of prioritizing his well-being over their own needs. Victoria's hospitalization following her miscarriage lasted 2 weeks, during which time the psychiatric evaluation revealed a complex history of unresolved grief from losing her first child decades earlier, and a pattern of using control and manipulation to manage her fear of abandonment. The court-appointed therapist's report described her obsession with my pregnancy as a misguided attempt to heal trauma she had never properly processed, though it emphasized that understanding her motivations doesn't excuse the systematic abuse she had inflicted. "She's been diagnosed with several personality disorders that help explain her behavior," Dr. Chen had explained when I asked about the psychological evaluation. But it's important to remember that mental illness doesn't excuse abuse, and her diagnosis doesn't obligate you to maintain any relationship with her. The revelation that Victoria's behavior had clinical explanations was less satisfying than I had expected, providing context for her actions without diminishing the real harm she had caused or the ongoing work required to heal from months of psychological assault. Understanding why someone hurts you doesn't automatically make the pain disappear or create an obligation to forgive them for causing it. Lucas's first steps came on a sunny Tuesday morning in Carmen's backyard, his determined wobbling between the patio chair where I sat and the garden fence where Carmen waited with outstretched arms. Watching him navigate those few feet of grass with such concentration and joy felt like witnessing pure determination and possibility, his achievement entirely his own, without anyone trying to claim credit or control the milestone. "Look at him go," Carmen laughed as Lucas collapsed into her arms with delighted giggles. "He's going to be walking everywhere before you know it." The freedom to celebrate Lucas's development without Victoria's interference or commentary felt revolutionary, each new skill and discovery belonging to him and to our small chosen family, rather than being appropriated by someone who viewed children as extensions of their own identity and accomplishments. His babbling attempts at words were encouraged without pressure, his exploration of textures and taste proceeded without criticism, and his sleep schedule developed naturally without someone insisting that routine was more important than responding to his individual needs. Dr. Foster's regular checkups had confirmed that Lucas was thriving physically and developmentally, his growth charts showing steady progress and his social responses demonstrating healthy attachment patterns. "He's clearly secure and loved," she observed during his 6-month appointment. "Whatever trauma he might have experienced in utero hasn't affected his ability to form strong bonds."
The relief of hearing professional confirmation that my decision to leave Victoria's house had protected Lucas from lasting harm was profound, validating my maternal instincts and the sacrifices required to break free from a situation that could have damaged him for life. The knowledge that children could sense stress and conflict even before birth had worried me during those final weeks of pregnancy, but Dr. Foster's assessment suggested that our escape had been timely enough to prevent serious psychological impact. My relationship with my own parents had gradually rebuilt once Victoria was no longer intercepting communications and manipulating narratives about my mental state and relationship satisfaction. Their monthly visits to meet their grandson provided Lucas with additional loving adults in his life, while giving me the emotional support of family members who respected my autonomy and parenting decisions. "We're so proud of how you've handled everything," my mother said during one of their visits, watching Lucas play peekaboo with my father. "It couldn't have been easy to leave everything behind and start over, but look what you've built for yourself and for him." The acknowledgement of my strength and decision-making abilities was healing after months of being told that I was incapable of making appropriate choices about my own life and pregnancy. Having my judgment validated rather than constantly questioned allowed me to trust my instincts again and approach parenting with confidence rather than fear of making mistakes that would be criticized and corrected by someone who claimed to know better. Carmen's suggestion that we formalize our living arrangement by adding my name to the house deed felt like both a practical solution and a symbolic recognition of the family we had created together. "You and Lucas aren't guests here anymore," she said one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. "This is your home, and I want you both to have the security that comes with legal recognition of that reality." The legal paperwork James Rivera prepared to establish our co-ownership of the property included provisions that would protect Lucas's inheritance rights and ensure our family's stability regardless of what changes the future might bring. Having a permanent home base felt essential for Lucas's development and my own sense of security after months of uncertainty about where we belonged and who we could trust. The small freelance projects that had begun as tentative steps back into professional life had evolved into a growing business that provided both creative satisfaction and financial independence. My portfolio now included logo designs for local nonprofits, marketing materials for small businesses, and website graphics for entrepreneurs who appreciated my attention to detail and collaborative approach to creative problem solving.
You should consider expanding into corporate clients, Carmen suggested as she reviewed my latest project proposals. Your work has gotten so much stronger since you started trusting your own vision again. The confidence to pursue larger projects and higher profile clients was still developing, but each successful completion added to my sense of professional competence and creative authority. Working with clients who valued my input and expertise was a stark contrast to the months when every creative decision had been questioned and overruled by someone who claimed superior knowledge about design despite having no relevant experience or training.
Lucas's bedtime routine had become my favorite part of each day. The quiet intimacy of reading stories and singing lullabies, creating a peaceful conclusion to whatever challenges or victories the day had brought. Holding him as he drifted off to sleep, his tiny hand curled around my finger, and his breathing gradually slowing into the deep rhythm of infant slumber, I felt the profound satisfaction of knowing that his sense of safety and security was entirely genuine. The nursery Carmen had helped me create in our shared home reflected Lucas's personality and my aesthetic preferences, without any input from people who viewed children as opportunities to impose their own vision of appropriate development and achievement. His books were chosen for their illustrations and stories rather than their educational value. His toys encouraged exploration and creativity rather than specific skill development. And his clothes were selected for comfort and practicality rather than making statements about family status or aspirations. Dr. Chen's final session before transitioning me to monthly check-ins rather than weekly appointments had focused on recognizing the signs of my own strength and resilience rather than dwelling on the trauma that had brought me to therapy originally. "You've not only survived a very difficult situation," she observed, "but you've used that experience to become a more intentional and confident parent than you might have been otherwise." The idea that surviving Victoria's abuse had somehow strengthened my parenting abilities felt both validating and slightly uncomfortable, since it suggested that trauma could have positive outcomes if properly processed and integrated. Dr. Chen helped me understand that acknowledging growth didn't minimize the harm I had experienced or suggest that the abuse had been worthwhile, but rather recognized my own agency in transforming a devastating experience into wisdom and strength. As I tucked Lucas into his crib that night and watched him settle into sleep with the complete trust that only secure children can demonstrate, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the early weeks of my pregnancy. Pure joy in the present moment without fear of who might try to control or destroy what we had built together. The golden child Victoria had been so desperate to possess had become simply my beloved son, free to grow and develop according to his own timeline and personality, rather than anyone else's expectations or demands. The future stretched ahead of us, filled with possibilities that belonged entirely to our small chosen family, each day bringing new discoveries and challenges that we would navigate together with the support of people who loved us without conditions or ulterior motives. Lucas's first steps had been just the beginning of a journey that would be entirely his own, protected by boundaries we had fought to establish and maintained by the strength we had discovered in each other.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.